We are at the Benzinga Cannabis Capital Conference in Detroit, and we are joined by Ira Weinstein of CohnReznick. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's been a wonderful day.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, tell us a little bit about the company, what you do in general, what you do in cannabis.
Sure. So CohnReznick is an accounting and consulting firm. So all the traditional services, but I think we do a little bit of a twist on the traditional services. We serve certain industries more specifically. We have a very large community development practice, which is a lot of real estate, affordable housing, government meets business, public-private partnership kind of stuff. And we also have a specific focus on a host of other industries: real estate, renewable energy, manufacturing and distribution, hospitality, tech and life sciences. And all those things, in some way, shape, or form, actually connect around cannabis.
Yeah.
So about 2.5 years ago, we were watching what was going on in this space and said, there's a lot we can add. And after a little bit of effort, we convinced the powers that be that we should be in this space, and we've never looked back. And we're now doing some really cool stuff.
That's the story of a lot of people in cannabis, including myself. Imagine when I told my mother, I was 24 and getting published on MarketWatch talking about, Warren Buffett, hedge funds, insider trading. I tell my mother 5 years ago, I'm getting into cannabis now, and she goes like, you're crazy. You're the first person who ever went to college in her family. Like, you're crazy.
So my parents, I don't know that they thought I was crazy. I think interestingly, they, like a lot of older folks, have come around too. Reefer madness has been referenced a lot today. I think they are of that generation where it was taboo, and yet they knew it was happening. They may have even known people that had some connection to it, but it was a bad thing. And now they're realizing that this plant has a lot of power, and it can deal with a lot of issues, medical in particular, that folks experience later in life.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd say that that's been an interesting dynamic when I'm either talking to my kids about it or my parents about it. Huh. And I think people are getting the fact that there's real value in a plant that can make a big difference in people's lives in a very positive way.
How old are your kids?
My kids, I have one is a senior in high school and 2 in college. So late teenagers, one just turned 20.
So when you say you talk to them about this, how do you do that? What's that conversation like?
Well, it's interesting. So I think they knew that I was getting into the space just overhearing conversations. They spent their life in the car or somewhere else where I'm on a conference call. They kind of pick up on what's being discussed. But interestingly, given the generation they've grown up in, there's probably stuff they could teach me about some of these things. They're aware of a lot through social media, movies, music.
Come on, Dad, siblings. A dab.
So it was an easy conversation and one that we didn't need a lot of groundwork for. We just sort of launched into, and I stress with them, like I think I should, that it's there's a responsibility to it, but there's a great value to it, and that the stigma is different and should be, in my opinion. And the kind of stuff we're doing, I think, is critical services in a responsible way to help a lot of people. That's been made. That point has been made a lot today. The notion of helping people.
Yeah.
And whether you're the biggest MSO in the country or whether you're a small ancillary company doing something, you're helping people.
The famous double bottom line.
Absolutely. Maybe triple. There is such a thing.
So what's the third component?
So, I would say if you're making money, helping society, and environmentally conscious, which is sort of another element, I think that the triple bottom line may exist, and that's what I think is bringing a lot of people and a lot of money into the space. There's a sense of social consciousness to it. Creative capitalism was just referenced by Coleman in the prior panel that I participated in.
Bill Gates and the only piece of the panel I caught.
You didn't think Bill Gates would come up in this day, in today's conversation?
Yeah. He does come up often.
He did.
Let's go back to CohnReznick. You service many of the largest cannabis companies, from Medman to Acreage Holdings to, correct me if I'm wrong.
So we are fortunate to be working with a lot of the MSOs in the space.
The Cannabis Fortune 100.
To a large extent. And interestingly, there are certain services we provide to certain clients and certain ones we don't, because there are a lot of other service providers in the space. But we feel like we've got a great value proposition. We can provide audit services, we can provide tax services, and we can provide a lot of advisory services. So we cover the regulatory sort of compliance aspects, but we also cover what makes a company more operationally effective. And that's what we love. We can make a big difference.
Yeah.
And for us, our success as a company has been about growing with our clients, being a real support system, strategic advisor to them. And like a lot of other industries, we're getting in on the ground floor and we're trying to make a big difference and play a small part in helping grow those companies.
I mean, you clearly have a wide perspective of macro trends within this industry. What are some trends you're observing specifically, and especially related to a practice, right, in a sense? Like what kind of...
So I think the trends that are particularly interesting, there are a lot of them, but I think that number one is just the number of consumers. I mean, that keeps expanding with expansion of licensing, with going from medicinal to rec, with awareness of just cannabis generally. I think that there's a massive market out there that's very untapped because people are unfamiliar or uncomfortable. There's still a stigma. The trends around what is still illegal but operating kind of in plain sight versus what's truly legal and should be supported as such. And then the other thing is just price. I mean, the wholesale and retail pricing and how fragmented the market is. That's a fascinating trend to watch and see it sort of ebb and flow a little bit because there are places where prices are picking up even though they've been sort of plummeting, and the reasons for that, the supply and demand. So I think that affects the way we think about the valuation work we do, the way we think about the M&A work we do, the impact it has to anything related to audit and tax work that we're doing in terms of the sort of bigger picture of the company.
I mean, you bring up valuation, and it's like a hot topic in cannabis, right? I don't use the word overvalued, but I do often say that many companies, especially Canadians, their valuations don't properly or traditionally, let's say, reflect their fundamentals, if you will.
Agreed.
So you're talking about valuation. How do you value a company?
Well, I think so it's hard. I think we have a lot of good data, and we rely on that data, and we try and be as true to the principles of the valuation industry as we can. Ultimately, where something trades, I guess the ultimate valuation is what a willing buyer will pay a willing seller. So our numbers are hopefully based more on the fundamentals to the extent there's data to support them. Where the ultimate transaction land is sometimes more affected by the intangibles around strategic value and other things that I think that's amongst the parties. But we're trying to do our best to support what is fundamentally sound. And that's challenging because I do think that depending on where you're trying to play geographically, there aren't a lot of comps and there isn't a lot to rely on. So we do what we can to be as good and responsible as we can on as much as we can.
Maybe sometimes there isn't even revenue or cash flow. I mean, many times that you're valuing a company on its potential. I remember only like 2 years ago, sitting with people who are actually financing the companies and discussing, just going back and forth and how they should value a certain company. They showed me, like, hey, this is how we're valuing it. And, I tended to ask, and their response was, well, I mean, honestly, it was kind of what they asked for. They were like, I am willing to give you 20% of my company for $1 million. So that means I am valuing the company at $5 million, period. Like, it was based on nothing but what people were willing to give up, or how much money were people willing to give you in exchange for X amount of equity, and that was valuing the company.
So fundamentally, that is a starting point. You got to get a lot deeper into it than that to get to the right place. But again, I think that I would hope it's not overvaluing as much as finding intangible value beyond the fundamentals that underlie the valuation. And it's definitely something we struggle with. We rely on the experience in the space to have a lot of data at our disposal. And I think that's the key. The more data we have, the more transactions that occur, the more people can get comfortable with what we're doing.
But what I wanted to ask in relation, like the reason why I brought up this specific anecdote was, is this still a thing, like valuing a company like this? Just like, well, I guess I can give him $1 million or her or them $1 million for 20%.
It's not nearly that simple. I do think that fundamentally, I hope people have a sense of what they think their company's worth, and therefore, based on the percentage they're selling, what the math would get you to. But in order to understand what it's worth, there's a whole lot more you got to dig into related to the fundamentals. And I think that's where hopefully we come in with a real value add to the valuation.
Are there any This is a loaded question. You can pass on it, but I'm going to ask you: are there any specific subsegments of the market you see valuations are particularly balanced, well balanced? Certainly not LPs and maybe MSOs, but like, is there any specific, again, like, I don't know, software, whatever?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that it's. I think that if you're talking about ancillary companies where it is an industry norm, but it's cannabis specific, then you may have the ability to rely on a different set of information. If it's plant touching activity, I do think that in geography where there's just more data, I think you've got more to rely on, and that's to me where it's more fundamentally sound. It's just where there's the information is just deeper and richer, more valuable, and you can rely on it in a more effective way. But there's art and science. We hope more science than art, but you got to do what you can to arrive at what seems to make fundamental sense, and then the transactional dynamic sort of is what it is, separate from the valuation.
So what's next for CohnReznick Cannabis? Is there a spin-off in the near future?
I don't think there's necessarily any spin-off. Our goal is to deploy every facet of our business into this industry, and we think we can. I think all of the services we provide, there's a great application. Some of it may evolve into kind of successive phases, but cannabis is moving at a pace that's pretty rapid, and so I think as the industry matures, as companies grow and get more effective in how they operate, we think there'll be more and more opportunity for us to sell services to them because there's real value to it. And like we have in other cases, we hope to grow with all these companies and with this industry. It's a fascinating ride, and I think what we'll see is as this mainstreams, it'll just bleed into so many other industries that there'll be tons of opportunities for everyone.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, for taking the time. This is great. We'll see you next time, I hope, in Chicago.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Look forward to it.